Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined live from Washington by SABC correspondent Kate Fisher. Kate, thanks very much indeed for joining us. One gets a sense that this was a man respected on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, absolutely. You really get that impression here. And that's, of course, in today's Washington, a pretty rare thing to find. Back then, maybe less so, but we understand that members of both the Republican and the Democratic Party at times have courted Mr. Powell as a potential candidate for president for their party. Such was his appeal to both sides. And he very much did embody this kind of moderate republicanism, which is pretty scarce these days. He was an internationalist, a moderate, his conservatism, kind of a more old-fashioned form of Republican for the Republican Party now that has, of course, become a lot more extreme. And perhaps that centrist approach of his is what made him appeal to both the Democrats and the Republicans. And of course, as you just heard there, in 2008, despite being a Republican, he came out in full support of Barack Obama, the Democratic candidate for president, and he did so again for Hillary Clinton and then again for Joe Biden. And in fact, after the events of January the 6th of this year, when there was that assault on the US Capitol here in Washington, Colin Powell was so distraught by what he'd seen that he said he could no longer call himself a Republican.
Yeah, a long and distinguished career before politics in the military, where he also distinguished himself.
Absolutely. He served, as you said, he served as a soldier in Vietnam. He didn't come to the military from some really smart Ivy League school. He made his way up from a working class background, the son of immigrants, Jamaican immigrants brought up in the South Bronx. He served in the military. He made his way up to becoming the first black joint chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so a tremendous amount of influence on military strategy. And of course, he was instrumental in both wars with Iraq. The first one in 1991 under President H.W. Bush, a successful mission where the US helped to liberate Kuwait from Iraq, and he received much praise for his role in that. In 2003, the second Iraq war under the next President Bush, President George W. Bush, far less illustrious. He came out of that with his reputation damaged, as many American leaders did, after he put forward a lot of evidence that he said was evidence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. We later found out that was not the case, and he said after that, later on, that will be a blot on his legacy forever. It really did stain his reputation. But yes, an active member of the military. And now just today, Lloyd Austin, who is the current Secretary of Defense here in the US, saying that he was a friend and mentor to him.
But one did get a sense, though, that even after that whole weapons of mass destruction presentation, that he wasn't 100% behind the position that the White House had taken, and he didn't last very long after that as White House as Foreign Secretary, didn't he?
Absolutely not. It was clear that he had a very different approach to that war. He apparently briefed President Bush that this would very likely cause huge disruption in the Middle East to oil prices, to the peace and stability of surrounding countries. He gave all this as his opinion to President Bush, but he said he ultimately believed it was up to the president. Well, it was up to the president to decide, and that he gave him the information, and that's the decision that he took. But yes, he was never 100% on board with this. We understand that before he made this famous speech to the United Nations, where he put forward all the reasons why he believed that the US should enter Iraq, He had been at the CIA really studying the intelligence that they had, and he didn't actually use a lot of it because he felt it wasn't solid enough. He only chose the stuff that he believed did stand as evidence for this, but clearly now we realise that intelligence was deeply flawed. He says that history will judge him, and he says he just wants to be, he has said in the past that he just wanted to be remembered as a soldier who did his best.
And he was a pioneer in many respects. I mean, becoming the first black Secretary of State and a very senior figure. And in some ways, I guess, led the way for the Condoleezza Rices and even perhaps the Barack Obamas to follow.
Absolutely. He is 100% a trailblazer, not just from a racial point of view, but also a socioeconomic point of view. He was the son of immigrants. He did not have a kind of privileged upbringing. He worked for what he got, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, when he paid tribute to him today, said that he was an example of the victory of the American dream, that shows that if you work hard enough and follow your dreams in the US, you can achieve great things, which is what he did. But certainly, I mean, there was talk at the time, several times, that he could become the first black president. Clearly, Barack Obama did that, but he paved the way for that. He paved the way for Condoleezza Rice, his successor, the first black woman to hold the post of Secretary of State. And now we do, of course, have Lloyd Austin as Defense Secretary now, the first African American to hold that post. And he gave he was visibly moved when he gave his tribute today to Colin Powell, calling him a great friend, and it was a huge loss. He said not just on a personal point of view, because they were very close, but because he was a mentor to him. So this is a man who had blazed a trail as a successful African American in the military, now advising the current Secretary of Defense, the first African American to hold that post. So yeah, you can't negate how much influence he had in blazing a trail for more African Americans and potentially inspiring others to do more, and to know that it was possible for them to rise up the ranks.
And his reputation also revered or respected across the globe. As Foreign Secretary, he was recognized as actually a good diplomat. He was really good at the job of being a foreign minister.
Absolutely. He was well liked and respected across the globe. As you say, one of the former leaders to pay tribute today, Tony Blair of the UK, who of course was Prime Minister in 2003 when the US and UK entered Iraq. And he said that he was incredibly capable and wise, but also a really lovely man, self-deprecating and kind. And that was the impression you got, that he was a decent guy, as well as being clearly very bright, very hardworking, and respected across the world, and as you said, respected across the political spectrum.
Yeah, and apart from that UN performance, not a scandal, nothing. It was just a regular guy who worked really hard and was very principled.
Yeah, that's right. Not married, was married to the same woman, Alma, for many, many years, had a son, and people in their tributes today have praised his, that he said, you know, not only was he a great soldier, a great diplomat, but he was also a great husband and a great father. And he's going to be missed by his family, clearly very, very much indeed. As you mentioned, he died of complications connected to COVID. At 84, he was in the high-risk category, and with this multiple myeloma cancer, that put him again at risk. But he did have that full vaccination, and no doubt his family were hoping that that was going to be able to protect him, and it just shows how vicious this disease can be.
Did he ever explain why he didn't step forward as a presidential candidate as far back as '96, and I think he turned it down again in 2000? Did he ever explain why he didn't go that final step? Because many people would have thought he might have been the first black president.
Absolutely, it was considered that it would be very likely if he had done so and perhaps, gone up against Bill Clinton. He has said since that it was that he thought long and hard about it, as I'm sure you would if you were approached for it. But he decided that, the kind of energy and the attitude you need to run for elected office was just not what he wanted to put himself through. I've read elsewhere that I don't think his wife was terribly keen on the idea either, and he made the decision not to do it. Obviously, being appointed to a job is a very different way of working in politics than actually having to campaign, persuade voters and stand for election. It's a slightly more stressful way of getting a job in this city.
You're dead right. Kate Fisher, thank you very, very much indeed for that update. Thanks for your time.